At several points throughout a year, there will be a period of time where certain champions, items, runes, and/or strategies become especially prevalent for their elevated success rate or effectiveness in contrast to alternatives. As more and more players catch wind of it and begin to follow that same strategy, the game enters what's called a meta. Such occurrence happens most often in competitive titles where players try to find whatever is the most effective tactic available, which coincidentally happens to share the same acronym as meta, although the two are unrelated. Ordinarily, metas are carefully monitored by developers to ensure they don't lead to a diversity problem, or rather lack thereof. Should such an occasion take place, they step in to balance things out, but it can be difficult to pinpoint exactly where and when to draw the line between an acceptable meta and a toxic one. There might even be strategies that aren't necessarily high in usage across all players, but the degeneracy of it can lead to frustration, prompting remedial action anyway. It's been a while since my first video on toxic metas, and obviously there are plenty more I haven't covered, so I suppose now would be a good time to make a part 2. Today we'll be looking through some more of the most toxic metas throughout League's decade and a half of release, explaining why they were so pervasive and their lasting effects on the game hereafter. We have 3 more to talk about, and I might actually make a part 3 since I have roughly 8 or so I want to cover, but regardless, let's get into it. At the start of the Mythic item system in Season 11, the community took notice of the surprisingly game-warping effects of each of them far beyond what existed at the time. Not only were previous items transformed into Mythics, but multiple new ones came into play that were just as playstyle determining as the Keystone runes when they were first introduced. With so many of them being incredibly powerful not only for their stats and item properties, but also their Mythic stat bonuses, the bulk of 2021 oversaw chunks of time dedicated to 1 or 2 of them dominating the metagame. Of all the mini-metas, however, Goredrinker had to have been the most annoying. More often than not, a single game could have 4 or 5 champions building in owing to how effective it was. Goredrinker offered a slew of highly valuable stats: damage, health regeneration, ability haste, and health, everything a physical damage champion wants, and while this was shared amongst the other bruiser items like Divine Sunderer, what made Goredrinker so powerful in particular were the unique properties it carried, not the least of which being the active Thirsting Slash, causing Goredrinker to deal slightly more than an auto attack's worth of damage to all nearby enemies in a fairly wide radius, as well as healing for a percentage of your missing health for each champion hit, and a fixed amount on top of that. For all intents and purposes, it was the equivalent of a Darius Q heal and then some, with a nice amount of damage on top of it. From the active alone, using Goredrinker against 3 or more champions would result in a massive heal, even more so for champions who got healing amps. Were it just that alone, Goredrinker would have been somewhat tolerable, but that wouldn't be the only part of it. The item also passively gave you up to 15% bonus AD based on your missing health, capping at 25% health or lower. Considering the item already gave you 45 attack damage, a respectable amount, this would add even more to its gold efficiency. Towards the mid to late game, most champs who would build Goredrinker had around 250 to 300 or so AD. A 15% bonus at the upper end granted you 45 more attack damage for a staggering total of 90 AD on a single item. The extra ability haste offered by the Mythic passive also further enhanced the efficiency of the item, since the active would be further reduced by ability haste too. So late game, Goredrinker's active had about an 8-second cooldown, with the potential impact of an actual champion ability. This item was so efficient and so practical that following the Stridebreaker nerf, it became bar none the best Mythic item rush for all physical damage classes. Skirmishers like Fiora, Riven, Kayn, and Clan rush Goredrinker, even those you wouldn't expect one after it like Tryndamere, Viego, and on rare occasions Jax. Divers of all kinds like Renekton, Rengar, Xin Zhao, Jarvan, and Lee Sin ran it for the sheer profile of stats it offered. Juggernauts like Set and especially Aatrox made liberal use of it, the former leading to the notorious mathematically correct Set builds and the latter being without question the best abuser of Goredrinker when used in tandem with his ultimate heal boost. I still remember seeing a level 16 Aatrox with a Spear Visage and Revitalize rune pop ultimate and use Goredrinker at 10% HP. He straight up healed all the way back to full. It was truly incredible how strong the active was, basically putting Ravenous Hydra to shame. Most surprising, however, was who else built it. Players generally looked to be in agreement that in the beginning the Assassin Mythics were the most underwhelming, causing them to search for better choices elsewhere. Given the propensity for Assassins to reach upwards of 400 plus AD late game, this item alone afforded potentially over 100 attack damage. Talon, Kiana, Nocturne, Shaco, Kha'Zix, practically every physical damage assassin who wasn't Zed took it, and I'm pretty sure even Zed took it at one point. Goredrinker was statistically more gold efficient than Eclipse, Prowlers, and Duskblade, offering equal if not slightly more offensive parameters. However, assassins would also receive bonus health, wave clear assistance, and sustain, making it the best option overall. The item was so overpowering that throughout Season 11 they had to essentially halve the strength of it by turning the active damage component to base AD instead of total AD, which is a bigger nerf than you think. They also lowered the healing ratio from 12 to 8%, and most crucially, they removed the bonus AD based on missing health, preventing it from giving any more than the attack damage it carried by default. Next to Hullbreaker, Goredrinker may have been the single most conventionally gold efficient item in the game's history. Much as I miss the dang thing, there's a reason I made a video dedicated to it back in 2021. This was a tier 0 item through and through. Around the same time, I believe at the beginning of Season 12, Happy Chime Noises would publish 3 of his most notorious videos. Honestly, they were so impactful he may have inadvertently popularized one of the worst metas in the game for top laners in a long time, the top lane support meta. Don't worry guys, he's still alive, he's just on hiatus, in case you were wondering how he's doing. Anyway, the 3 videos released on this topic were Yuumi top, Janna top, and Rakan top. One of them in particular, Smite Janna top, garnered enough attention to be seen even in pro play if I recall correctly. The gist of this strategy is to pick support champions like Janna top and then basically abandon the lane, only sticking around to fetch a couple levels and gold, then permaroam, forcing the enemy team to play in a certain way to respond. The thought of letting a potential top lane hypercarry free farm all game and split push might sound asinine to many of you, but it was a risk well worth taking. Janna and by extension other supports would take spell thief and then harass you in lane to accumulate some gold. They would then act as a second jungler, running throughout the enemy jungle to steal camps using smite or ganking lanes alongside the jungler. Lanes might be able to ward off a 1v2 or 2v3 gank, but seldom a 1v3 or 2v4, and that's what top supports were banking on. While they did relinquish pressure in top lane given the delayed nature of the role in that even if a top laner had a lead, it would be a while before they could exert pressure on the map, the support top player would be able to acquire advantages of greater magnitude elsewhere. There were 3 factors making this a viable strategy. The first being the support champion's lack of need for resources. The reason being behind as a top laner feels soul crushing is because not only can the enemy top laner freeze against you until the end of time or conversely solo tower dive you over and over again, but in general most top laners need gold and experience to scale into the mid to late game. Expectedly, support champions did not, only needing a few key items and then relying on the utility of their base kit. As such, the disadvantage of being denied experience and gold was of lesser import to them, diminishing the adverse consequences of abandoning your lane. Not only that, but top laners also bank on scoring maybe a kill or 2 in the early game, which offers additional gold and experience to add to their pool. But without a lane opponent, they can't get any kills, which bottlenecks how fast they can scale. Adding on to that, second factor is that the jungler now had access to lane CS, resulting in a pseudo gold funnel strategy. Occasionally, the Janna top would return to top lane alongside her jungler to gank the enemy top laner and then let the jungler take CS. When paired in tandem with a snowball jungler like Blueking or Hecarim, they could get like a 3-level advantage against the enemy jungler by 15 minutes. And on that note, due to the way shutdowns were calculated back then, the enemy top laner would begin to accumulate a shutdown bounty as a result of how far behind the support top would be in gold, since understandably we'd be seeing potentially a 100 CS deficit over the course of a game. So by the end of laning phase, the top laner, despite being 0-0-0, might have a 200 gold shutdown on them. Third factor is that, as mentioned before, it would force the enemy team to play a specific way, oftentimes in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because the team with the support top had effectively 2 junglers, the enemy jungler would not be able to comfortably navigate the map without being spotted and collapsed on. Janna top was usually seen running around with her jungler or mid laner to make plays around the map. Fighting off a potential predator jungler on your own would be hard enough. Imagine fighting them and a support top. Sometimes the added pressure from support tops perma-roaming would be so oppressive a multitude of outcomes would happen. The enemy jungler would be unable to secure any objectives due to constantly being outnumbered, meaning you'd start the mid-game having to play catch-up in terms of working towards Dragon Soul and whatnot. The enemy mid and bot lane would be seriously crippled from the constant roams, which meant even if the enemy top laner took advantage of the free lane to farm up and get tower plates, they wouldn't be able to 1v5 the game. And lastly, the enemy top laner would sometimes be forced to rotate with the support top to mitigate the pressure disparity, but as stated before, the loss of resources will hurt the traditional top laner far more than Janna, Karma, Rakan, or whomever. It's a lose-lose situation for the enemy team. Now, even though this sounded extremely broken, and to some extent it was, playing support top necessitated impeccable game sense and macro understanding to actually pull off. For all you stood to gain, you were indeed risking a lot by giving up top lane to let the enemy top laner farm for free. If you did not achieve an advantage around the map, you'd be completely screwed, far beyond if you just picked a tank top lane and AFK farmed for 20 minutes. In light of the huge variance in results for support top, Riot eventually took measures to prevent it from being viable in the first place, namely by making it so you can only get gold from attacking champions if you were next to a teammate, as well as disabling the gold generation altogether if you lasted too many minions. I think I speak for all people, not just top laners, when I say this is not a meta I want to see again. I want to know how people even discovered it to be a working strategy. For the final meta of the day, we'll be going over a decade back to when we still had the old Summoner's Rift. Just like today, junglers had access to a variety of exclusive items back then, offering different effects for different playstyles. One item in particular was especially noteworthy for creating a time period known as the eponymous Feral Flare meta. Feral Flare was actually the completed version of an item called Wriggle's Lantern, so we'll look at that first. Wriggle's Lantern gave a small amount of attack damage and attack speed, as well as bonus gold from monster camps. Additionally, every time you scored takedowns or cleared monster camps, you would get a Feral stack. For each one, you would deal bonus on-hit magic damage and heal for a flat amount. The healing actually used to also scale off Feral stacks until they took it away 2 patches in. In the scope of modern-day item power scaling, Prevailing Wisdom might not think of this as too impactful. But the reason this item was so broken back in the day had less to do with the stats it gave and more about the unique properties attached to it. For starters, a 30% bonus gold generation, which at its highest point used to be 40. Power farming junglers like Shyvana, Master Yi, and Udyr would literally generate more gold per minute by AFK farming camps and objectives and ganking and scoring kills, all while accumulating more bonus on and magic damage. Said magic damage and previously healed would then infinitely scale, so by 30 minutes onwards, Feral Flare junglers could be dishing out easily over 100 magic damage on hit and heal for a flat 50 health per hit too. Keep in mind it was a flat amount of healing, it wasn't lifesteal, so armor or magic resist couldn't do anything to reduce it. Considering this came from an item that cost only 1800 gold, that is not a bad deal whatsoever. As an extra convenience, they would also acquire the ability to place down green wards, the selfsame one only supports can place down now. More confounding is that the placement range was 1000. Most of the time to ward a brush, you have to risk getting a little too close to it, thereby exposing yourself to a possible face check. Feral Flare junglers did not have to, they could place the ward across the full screen away, making it very easy for them to avoid confrontation. So when you took into account the safety and consistency of accumulating gold through AFK farming when compared to engaging in fights against the enemy team, the pragmatic choice was to do just that. Throughout Season 4, power farming junglers would spend 30 to 40 minutes with total disregard for their team or the current map situation. By the end of it all, they would have a fully stacked Feral Flare and 3 items. Given these were also hyperscalers like Yi and Shyvana, they would become the strongest champions in the game without question, stat checking everyone into oblivion through all the golden stacks they accumulated. If it wasn't apparent, this was not a very fun time for the other 8 members in the game. While back then they weren't as impactful as they are now, most champions were in need of the jungler to make any meaningful plays. The problem is that both junglers full muted at the start of the game and pretended like they were caving in Minecraft just going about their day, so both teams would essentially have to play 4v4, having few if any ways to advance the game state outside of scoring solo kills, which were much harder to do 10 years ago due to there being simply less damage and mobility back then. Provided your lane opponent wasn't a complete idiot, you would just be at a stalemate all game. Usually, that's when the jungler came in to make something happen, but we just established there was no jungler on either team, not for the first 30 minutes of the game. I shit you not, if you think AFK farming junglers are scum of the earth today, you haven't seen real AFK farming. Feral Flare abusers were unironically 0-0-0 by 30 minutes, actively and intentionally avoiding confrontation just to farm. Games would go on for painfully long without either team accomplishing anything until the junglers eventually decided to stop farming and to actually do something around the map. However, once they did, the roles would be reversed. The match would turn from a 4v4 into a 1v1, with the other 8 members of the team being nothing more than glorified supports. The Feral Flare junglers would be so far ahead of everyone else in stats, gold, and champion scaling that fights and subsequently games were determined by which one could kill the other. There was no possible way in God's green earth a team could fight a Feral Flare jungler without a Feral Flare jungler of their own. It was almost like Xinjiao on release where they could 1v9 the game by literally beating you to death with a big bag of gold. So at the end of it all, Riot decided to rework it into the Sated Devourer enchantment, placing a hard cap on how many stacks you could get with it, and also removing the bonus gold generation passive to incentivize junglers to start participating at a reasonable time. What I find interesting about these metas more than anything is how the response to them wasn't to tone them down or introduce counterplay, but to remove them entirely. At the very least, for things like Ardent Sensor or Tank meta, they just made it so they were no longer tier 0 strategies, but Feral Flare, Support Top, and Gore Drinker are no longer even present in the game because the item or mechanic was rendered defunct altogether. I'm not complaining, mind you, but it goes to show you that something was truly degenerate for the game when it had to be removed completely. Anyways, that concludes part 2 of the worst items in League of Legends history. Let me know in the comments down below which of these you think was the worst, as well as if you want to see a part 3. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my part 1 of Toxic Metas if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.